Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from everywhere, anywhere in the world you join us from. My name is Mario Picon, Director of the Governance Action Hub. About 340, 350 people from over 60 countries have signed up for this inaugural masterclass under the Hub. And we are extremely thankful and humbled by your interest and commitment to being here. Knowing Julio, who I will introduce in a moment, it will be an engaging learning opportunity for you, but also for him, as we hope you feel comfortable sharing ideas, questions, and turning this into a conversation that can even follow up beyond the masterclass itself. We are very much looking forward to understand and to listen to your perspectives and questions over the next few weeks. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, the country that you are calling us from or that you are originally from, and maybe one word that describes how you're feeling today. I mean, what are the kind of things that you would like to explore, however you're feeling in particular as we start the masterclass today. It will be great to get to know you as we move through the different modules too. So let me just share a couple of details as we're waiting also for more people to connect at this moment. So first of all, who are we, right? We have been talking about a masterclass. Maybe you saw this in an announcement at the Bloom. Maybe you saw it through our networks and social media. Maybe you saw it because you are part of the Governance Explorers Network. Maybe because you're a friend of the program and somebody recommended it. Maybe because you know Julio, right, from his past life. So in the end, this is organized under the Governance Action Hub. The Governance Action Hub is a governance lab focused on exploring ways to enhance collaboration and inclusion. Now, we see collaboration and inclusion as key, not only ethically correct, but also important, practical, to actually push forward and identify new ways to approach different, difficult, complex problems. We believe very much in the potential of network approaches in informing and spurring institutional action to solve both local and global challenges. We'll be very happy to share more information about the hub over time. So now, as part of this, what we're building over time is what we call the Governance Explorers Network, under the key idea that while everyone, I'm sure, will agree that collaboration is important, it is less clear how to make collaboration work because we are not necessarily used to it. Collaboration, we believe, is very much like a muscle. You need to flex it. You need to train it. Over time, it can grow and it can be more effective. Through this Governance Explorers Network, what we intend to do, since we started this year, is basically identify different people that may be willing to explore collaboration in finding solutions to concrete problems. Those problems can be thematic, can be country-based, can be shared by many or not so many. But the point is to find those opportunities for this expertise and this collaboration from people from different perspectives and walks of life, right? That opportunity for them to contribute to the solution of the problem. This way, we hope that we are able to share expertise in practical ways to inform and inspire action. The theme can be diverse. We're right now looking at issues like renewing and rethinking democracy, climate action, state capture, complex challenges, but also opportunities to try new approaches to governance, learn from each other, and inform action. So this is basically the premise, and why I'm telling you this, because in the end, Julio is also a governance explorer. And this idea of us trying to experiment with ways to connect with people for promoting in many ways, rather than capacity building, capacity sharing, right, as a concept, as something important, to a different way to approach capacity building and so we have been looking at different ways in which we can promote and execute this. And then Julio actually was the one that approached us as a member of the Governance Explorer Network with an idea, right? This topic is important, public leadership. We need more of it. sometimes we don't know how to get there. How do we learn from each other about it? And I was very excited, to be very honest, that Julio approached us to try and to actually do this and engage with a wider audience, given in particular the experience that he has. So Julio Guzman is currently the Global Policy Director at the University of Maryland in the School of Public Policy. But he has like a very, very large CV of different experiences, including being a presidential candidate in Peru, a senior fellow at very important institutions around the world, and he will tell you a bit more about his background and his path of life. So we really hope that that shared experience and that formation that he has received over the years is something that you find useful, right, in either inspiring or informing the way that you approach your own leadership in the public sector, or how do you approach public sector in general from the particular organization or the particular role that you currently have. We're very much looking forward to these 6 sessions. I'm not going to go any further. I'm going to pass it to Julio in about a minute or so, but just wanted to review with you so everybody is aware of like what is the kind of incentive that we're trying also to give so you stick with us too during the 6 sessions. We know that you are busy, and we are very thankful that you're dedicating time for this. But also, we know that it's important to share and to discuss all the different aspects of public leadership here, which have been organized in these 6 modules. So as a bit of an incentive, right, like what we are trying to promote is that if you are able to attend all 6 live sessions, right, like you will be eligible for one out of 3 different prizes in which you will receive actually one-on-one coaching with Julio Guzman. And this will take part. This will actually take effect starting in January 2026, and it will be 3 different sessions of 1 hour or discussions and coaching with Julio Guzman. The winners will be announced early December 2025 at the end of our cycle of this masterclass. Anyway, just for you to know also, during the next few weeks, since we're going to be connected, we're going to have this opportunity to get together, right? I guess that it's important that you know that there are other members of this team behind. You're going to see that Natida Nivasnanda is going to be basically managing all things related to tech, related to the masterclass. Alessandra Granelli has also a role particularly related to comms, into dissemination. She's the one that manages our social media channels too. Tracy Joyste is going to be in the moderation of the Q&A section of this. And of course, Julio is going to be the presenter throughout. Just a message, right? Like, why a masterclass series? This is just another way, one of many ways that we can use through the Governance Explorers Network, right? To connect people, share knowledge, exchange experiences and expertise, right? There are other channels out there that we may be able to use over time. And we look forward actually to feedback and ideas from other members of the Governance Explorers Network. We very much hope that you consider joining over time beyond this masterclass, but even if not, right, like that you are able to nurture and grow personally through this masterclass. Thank you very much. And Julio, it's all you now. Please go ahead. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Mario. Can you see me? Hello, can you see me?
I can see you, but it will be great if somebody on the yes, but we got raised hands on the
All right. Can you see me now? And can you hear me well?
Yes, we're getting a lot of yeses in the chat.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, if something happened with the audio or the video, please let us know in order to correct that, all right? So first of all, good morning, good afternoon, and good night, because I know that there are people that are getting connected from different parts of the world, and that's an honor for me and for the team. So thank you very much for being here. First of all, I would like to thank R4D and Mario Picon in particular, the director of the Governance Action Hub, for believing in young people, which indeed are the people who are going to make the change. And I also would like to thank his team for believing in mentorship as one of the pieces for achieving social justice. So what I'm going to do, it's from now, I'm going to share the structure of the presentation, but I'm going to start, first of all, I would like to confirm if you can see the screen. You can see the screen, right?
No, we can't.
Nope.
We just see a black screen. We can't see
Oh,
the
okay, great. Black
presentation.
screen.
Yeah.
Black screen. All right. So I'm going to start first talking about a disclaimer about the presentation. Sorry, 1 second. A disclaimer. It's very important before talking about policy reform within the government to be really clear about what we're going to talk about. The first issue that I want to share with you is that I'm not here to teach. I'm here to share. I'm going to share my own experience. And that means that I don't pretend to hold the truth. I don't pretend to understand reality fully. The only thing that I'm going to do is to share my experience with you. In all my journey, I never had the opportunity to talk to someone that was older than I who could tell me, how things are in the future, particularly in the area that I wanted to be. And I think this is a great opportunity for me to share and try to also get feedback from you. So this is a personal experience. I'm going to be completely honest with you, which means that I'm only going to share things that I saw and I experienced. I'm not going to tell you things that are diplomatic just for the fact of being nice or appear to be nice. I'm not going to evade to be controversial because there are things that needs to be controversial, even if they are really the things that I have observed. Then this presentation and this masterclass is about practice. It's not about theory. Everything that I'm going to share with you are the things that I experienced. As I already said, I'm going to use theory in a very specific cases because it's important to make clear definitions about the things that we're going to talk about. So only in those cases I'm going to treat theory a little bit, but 99% of the masterclass is extremely practice and hands-on work within the government. The approach that I am using is the approach in which we live our lives, which is a multidisciplinary approach. I'm not going to talk about economics. I'm not going to talk about public policy only. Dealing in government is dealing with human beings. And that means that we need to deal with different aspects of our lives. So I'm going to talk about economics, of course, but also sociology, psychology, history, anthropology, and many disciplines that has to do with the practice of policy reform within the government. The things that I'm going to share with you, most of them are experiences that I had in my home country, in Peru, in the positions that I had in government, but also in politics. Of course, I work in international organizations as well, but most of my experience in government, of course, because I am citizen of Peru, it's based on my experience there. However, I'm pretty sure that many of them, maybe not all, but many of them are lessons that could be applied to any part of the world. And as I said, because at the very end, we're human beings. And finally, this presentation is not ideological based. I am a progressist, a liberal progressist, and I have my beliefs. But the things that I'm going to share with you, it's about reality, about the things that I saw. And one of the things that I learned in practice is that more important than following ideology, it's following values and principles. And I expect that during my presentation, I will be clear about that. So this is not ideological, it's extremely practice and the things that I have experienced. Who I am, very briefly. Well, I will say that I am a person who had a very close relationship with my dad, and that marked my life. My dad was my closest friend, and he died when I was a kid, when I was 14 years old. And that was the most devastating thing that happened in my life because of the relationship that I had with him. And he told me three things that are stuck in my mind until now. The first is treat people with respect and kindness all the time. The second was get into education. Education is the most important thing to try to grow and to achieve the things that you want. And third, he told me that life is completely meaningless if you don't dedicate part of your life to improve other people's lives. And those were the three things that my dad left me, and I think that were enough for me to have a path since I was a kid. And what I have done since that time is just doing that, is to follow those values, is to try to achieve the things that my dad taught me that at the very beginning I didn't fully understand, indeed, honestly. But over the years, when I started growing up, I really embraced those values. And embracing those values means following your dreams. And one of the problems or one of the challenges of following your dreams is that you need to abandon the idea of having a career. You know, in Western culture, uh, it's very entrenched, this idea that you must have a career, which is a linear increasing, no, in your professional experience, in the places that you work. But when you are following your dreams, that pattern is completely obsolete. Because following your dreams means that you are following the things that make you happy and make you consistent with the things that you really value. So following your dreams is a zigzag experience in your life. It's not a linear advance, but it's a zigzag. You're going to be in different places trying to explore and to feel achieved following those dreams. And that zigzag experience and not having a career is what my CV says. And I'm going to share very quickly with you the things that I have done because it gives you exactly the same message. It's being in places in which I felt that my work was meaningful in order to change people's lives. So in general, the most important idea of my experience is that I have experienced policy reform from many different angles. And this is really rare. I'm not saying that it's better or it's worse. What I'm saying is that this was my experience. It's very unusual. People in academia used to stay in academia. People in policymaking used to stay there and so on. But in my case, because I was trying to find the place to make change, I was in different places. So I experienced policy reform from the academia. I studied my master, my PhD. I was professor at different universities. But at the same time, as policymakers, I moved in policymaking in the Inter-American Development Bank in Washington, D.C., 10 years advising countries in different aspects. But also, I was in government. I was Vice Minister of Industry in Peru and then Deputy Prime Minister in Peru. I was President of the Cabinet of Vice Minister, which is the Prime Minister is the President of the Cabinet of Ministers, right? Of course, depending on the political system of every country, but also there is another position, which is the President of the Cabinet of Vice Ministers, the guys who coordinate policy reform and who make policy reform happen. So that was a very good experience. And finally, I get into politics. And I get into politics creating a new party, Partido Morado, who already appointed a president. We had representation in Congress twice, and I ran for president 2 times. And the reason behind this journey is that I was trying to follow up, I was trying to pursue a place in which I will really make change. And when I was in the academia, I think, yes, now I understand, but I don't feel that I'm making change. So I moved to policymaking to say, okay, I'm going to advise countries to make that change. And I was frustrated again because I was just an advisor and many authorities don't listen to you because of many reasons and incentives. Then I moved to the government. I said, okay, now it's my time. Now is the opportunity to make change because I'm going to be in government and I have the opportunity to be in a high position. And I was wrong again, because at the very end, who makes the decisions about people's lives are not technocrats, are politicians. And that's why I get into politics, to try to make change. And finally, at my 55 years old, I really feel that I had the opportunity to make that change, to change people's lives. And now I feel very fulfilled with that. I'm very fortunate in the sense that I could have this different whole perspective and at the same time to have the opportunity to make change. So I really hope that my experience could help you. It could help you not to teach you, as I said, just to share the things that I've seen, and you can listen and say, oh, these things make sense and these other things do not make sense. That's completely okay. But I wanted to share with you because I didn't have the opportunity through my life to have an older figure who tell me the things, how life works and how to achieve my dreams. So I've been involved in different policy reforms, as you can imagine, from my experience. I've been involved in e-government policy reform, how to transform the government to digital services in Peru. I've been involved in the policy reform to create the National Agency for Social Conflict. Peru is a country in which we have a lot of mining activities and of extractive industries activities. And the friction with the communities is really high and is permanent. So we try to create this National Agency for Social Conflict Resolution. I also been involved in policy reform for science and technology, to create agencies in Peru to promote science and technology. Also, I've been involved in policy reform for industrial policy, which is one of my expertise, how to make the country to diversify their economy, to export more products, and so on, industrial policy. And finally, I was involved in the acquisition of the first Peruvian satellite. Peru is a developing country, and we didn't have a satellite. And the government called me in order to try to figure it out, a campaign and a research a study in order to be able to buy the satellite. So I was able to do that too. So I was involved in many policy reforms and also coordinated policy reforms with other people in the government. And one of the things that I learned, it's how policy reform has their many differences, because every single one is different. Every single one belongs to a different area. They have different strategic goals. They involve different people. But all policy reforms, all of them has something in common. And I structured this presentation in order to share with you that common structure, the things that happen all the time. It doesn't matter if it's a policy reform in education, of health, of everything, but happens all the time. It's like a universal template. That's what I would like to share with you. So my question is, if you are ready to start the masterclass. I hope that you can enjoy and this could be useful for you. So we're going to start, all right? The best way to understand this universal template that I'm telling you, this commonality in policy reform implementation, the best way is to explore the works of Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell was a professor, an American professor in the 20th century, and he was obsessed with understanding the meaning of mythologies across continents and also along human history, from the ancient civilizations till now. So he studied more than 100 mythologies, 100 mythologies. And every single mythology was different in their length, in the names of the heroes, in the stories, everything. But he identified that there was one common pattern in all mythologies: Roman, Greek, in the Ocean Pacific, India, Persia, Egypt, the Americas, North America. All of them has one thing in common. And the one thing in common is that all mythologies talk about the same thing. Is what is important in life and how to achieve it. And what is important in life, according to Joseph Campbell, it's purpose. Every single mythology talks about purpose as the key point in human life. And how to achieve it is through a process that involves a call for adventure or a call for a mission, then challenges or trials, then transformation, understanding, and finally wisdom, and finally achieving that purpose. So I'm going to try to use that understanding of Joseph Campbell because it's pretty similar of the things that I've seen. It's extremely close, and it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. And why? Because when we analyze policy reform, many of us that coming from an academic training, in my case, I am an economist, and we used to think that policy reform is about knowledge, right? That it's the technicalities is to be trained and to know how to do things, and that's not true. Indeed, policy reform is about understanding human beings. It's about understanding the nature of Homo sapiens sapiens, our species. And that's why this kind of work of Joseph Campbell is so useful to understand policy reform. I'm going to start with one example of the mythologies that Joseph Campbell said in order to introduce the issue of policy reform with you in this first session. And one of the examples that Joseph Campbell talked about is the mythology, this story of medieval ages about the knight that want to rescue the princess in the castle. Most of us, I would say, I'm telling you, 99% of the people who are now connecting with us, I'm sure that they think, as I used to think, that the story of the knight and the princess is a story about romance. It's a story about a man that wants to conquer the love of his life, right? Well, that's not true. Joseph Campbell identified and discovered that the story about the knight and the princess has nothing to do with love and romance. It's about personal growth and about fulfilling your mission in life. Indeed, the knight is you. The knight, according to Joseph Campbell, the knight is you. The horse is your purpose, is what you want to achieve in life, is your dream. The wizard, this guy who makes magic, is your mentor, is the older person who is gonna try to share with you his experience or her experiences in order for you to understand your path. Then, what is the dragon? The dragon is yourself. It means that in order to get your dream and your purpose, you need to fight first with yourself, with your insecurities, with your fears, with everything that limits you to get out of your comfort zone. So the dragon is yourself. That's why when the knight defeats the dragon and gets to the princess, it gets to the goal because now I'm free. Now I defeat all my insecurities. And do you remember when the dragon is protecting a treasure, right? The dragons in these stories, they are protecting a treasure. The treasure is knowledge. If you defeat the dragon, if you defeat your insecurities, you're gonna get to knowledge that I'm gonna be useful for you to get your goal. Who is the king? The king are the rules of the system of life, how life works. And that's the king. The king means the rules of life. And finally, the princess is not the love of your life. The princess is the purpose. Is that if you are able to be a knight with your passion, your horse, that is your purpose, you learn through a mentorship, and you go through these challenges, understanding how love works, and you defeat yourself, you finally achieve your goal, and your goal is the princess. So that's the story of the medieval ages. It's nothing to do with love. So I found this interpretation amazing because it's pretty close to the experience that I saw in policy reform implementation during my time as government official, politician, and also economist. So welcome to Leadership for Policy Reform. From now on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start explaining to you the structure of the whole masterclass. Not only explaining to you what we're going to do in the first session, but giving to you a big picture of what we're going to discuss through these 6 weeks for you to have a clear idea of the goals that we pretend to achieve. All right? So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to try to understand who are you? The very beginning, the night. It's what is a reformist leader? What is the meaning of a leader who wants to make policy reform? Because we have leadership is a very general concept. It has their own specific definition, but they have different applications in different dimensions of our lives. But leadership, public leadership for policy reform, is a much more specific definition, and we need to deal with that. And also we need to understand not only what public leadership is, but also what reform is, because there are a lot of confusions. When I get into the government, and when I used to talk about this, people understand reform, policy reform, as many ways. So we need to discuss that. It's very difficult to share all these things in the masterclass if we don't start discussing what it is public leadership and what it is policy reform. So we're going to do that first in the first session. In the second session next week, we're going to talk about the horse. We're going to talk about our purpose, the idea, the policy reform, how to create the policy reform, the idea, how to define the policy reform, how to build, how to understand, how to do the research, how to design the policy reform. What are the things that we need to take care of in order to have this idea that we want to sell, that we would like to shape our purpose? So policy reform, only the design of policy reform, even before discussing with other people, stakeholders and the society and everything, you should have your policy first before going there. And in this second masterclass, we're going to talk about that, and I would like to expand my explanation of the things that I'm saying now. So the second session is about policy design, how to do it. Then the third session, it's the wizard, it's the storytelling. It's almost impossible. If you are a knight, you have the passion, you have the idea of the change that you want to make for social justice, you have pretty clear idea of what you want to do, but you need to communicate that idea because you need to convince people. Policy reform, listen please, policy reform is not implemented because the design is great, because you have been a policymaker coming from the best universities in the world and you have all the expertise and it's great and your policy, it's amazing. No. Policy reform is successful because you are able to convince people through communication. You should have a story to tell, a very simple story and a very convincing story that everyone could understand, even a 5-year-old kid. We're going to talk about that, the strategies and also examples of storytelling for policy reform and how it will make your life easier to try to sell indeed your idea in the process of policy reform implementation. After that, we're going to talk about the system, the rules of the game, the king. We're going to talk about how the government works. You could have passion, your policy design great, your story amazing, is very compelling, but if you don't understand how the government works, what are the limitations, the restrictions, the degrees of freedom that you have to execute your policy reform, you are done. And that happened to me many times. When I get into the government, I thought I had very good ideas, but it was impossible to implement it because there was no tools. The administrative system will not allow to implement that policy reform. So we need to understand the rules of the game. After that, we're going to talk about the stakeholders. Are not the stakeholders within the government. I'm talking about the stakeholders in society. Once you have everything prepared, well, you need to get into the policy process. We're talking about democracies. We're not talking about dictatorship in this masterclass, which means that you need to deal with society, with interest groups. There are going to be interest groups that are going to support your idea, and there are others that they don't. So you need to deal with that. How? How to create alliances, how to reach people to support you, how to confront the opponents to your policy reform and try to understand why they are confronting you. There's nothing personal. It's just that you represent a threat for them. We're going to try to understand how stakeholders behave and some strategies on how to deal with stakeholders. All the things, just a parenthesis, the things that I'm sharing with you are things that I learned, but not because I was successful. I want to make this absolutely clear. The things that I'm going to share with you, that I'm telling you that this is going to happen to you in the future, is not because I was successful. So I have the authority to tell you this because I won. No. Many, maybe more than half of the things that I'm going to share with you is things that I failed. My failures. But because of my failures, I understood. Finally, I understood. And next time, I tried to do it better and could achieve partial successful maybe. But many of those things are learned, and you are going to learn the things, not because you're going to succeed. You're going to learn mostly because you're going to fail in the process. And finally, the last session, it's about ourselves. Is how to survive as a human being after policy reform implementation. Through this process, you're going to be exhausted psychologically, mentally. You're going to be attacked. You're going to be marginalized. People are going to try to destroy your life. And why? Because you're trying to change the status quo. And every single person who tries to change the status quo is going to be attacked because there are many people that benefit from the status quo. So the question at the very end is, how can I navigate through this experience and not die in the process? And what are the psychological and mental tools that I have at my disposition to survive? So in this final session, I will share my experience of things that happened to me and what were the sources that I found to comfort myself and to keep going and to not allow the experience that I had to change who I am in essence. If you are an idealist in the very beginning and you pass to this reality check of things, bad things that are going to happen to you, don't allow those things to change who you are by nature. If you are an idealist, if you were an idealist at the very beginning, I'm sure that all this experience will change your perspective of seeing life, but will never change your idealistic way of being. It's just going to be a realistic idealism, if you want to see it that way. Because I have seen many people who really changed who they were for the bad. For the bad. They were very optimistic, that now they are not. They were dreaming about change and they believe in change, and now they don't. And it's really sad. In my case, I went through a lot of pain and a lot of problems, but still I'm here and I'm still optimistic, and I know that change is possible. I know because I have seen it, but my perspective has changed in the sense that I am more realistic now, which is indeed better in order to make that change. So that's the structure of the masterclass. And as I said, the story of Joseph Campbell and the medieval ages story of the Knight and Princess, it's pretty close to the structure for policy reform implementation across areas and I am sure that across countries. This is the commonality of our policy reforms. All of them goes through these 6 angles of dimensions. So we're going to start now formally with our first session of the masterclass. And we're going to make a break after a point in order to receive your questions, interactions, because the idea is to, as I said, to share all of us. All right. What is the reformist leader? And now we need to define what public leadership is and what reform is. A little bit of concepts, but it's very important in order to understand the whole practice that comes after that. So first is that any advance in humanity, every advance in humanity involved 3 things. 3 things that people feel in the process. First one is feeling that you are making progress. That's a feeling in that process of advance. The second feeling, it's change. Is facing challenges to make that progress. But to make that progress through change and challenges, the only way to do that is collectively, is in a group of people. So advances in humanity involve these 3 things, always. But there is a problem. The problem is that it requires human behavior, adjust in human behavior, but most importantly is that people like making progress. So the first piece or the first element of advance in humanity, the first one, people love it, make progress. But people don't like change. This is really interesting because in political campaigns, always we saw change, and people are excited by change, and that's not entirely true. People want to make progress, but they don't want to sacrifice their life making change for them. And finally, working collectively is something that they dislike even more. So from the 3 pieces of advancing humanity, we only like one, the experience of feeling better. But we are not willing to confront challenges, and we are not willing to work together to do that. So how humanity has advanced? Because there is an exogenous factor that comes into that reality and make the advance happen. And that exogenous factor is leadership. That's why we experience these advances, because of leadership, not because of individuals in particular, because, as I said, they fear change. So in leadership, it's, I'm going to use a very general concept, is leadership is the practices of mobilizing people, which people don't like, to tackle tough challenges that people don't like, and thrive, which people like. And then leadership, of course, gives direction, gives protection, and gives order, but not in the ways that maybe most of you think. Direction, protection, and order are not the definitions that the Western world understand, that the leader is protecting physically, that is giving his life for everyone. No, it means that the only fact that a leader is giving you a north of a purpose only by giving you clarity about what is the direction in which you need to go. Only for doing that, he's giving you direction, protection, and order. So one of the important things about leadership is that it is really cool that you can achieve your final goal. It is really cool. But if you don't achieve that goal, it doesn't mean that it has been meaningful, that has been meaningless. No, not at all. Just to be in the process and just to give direction to people is a very important value. And that's what leadership does, aside from the things that are obvious to us. Just giving a direction, because people are really confused. People look for leaders because they don't have direction. And when you give direction to people, their levels of anxiety goes down. But leadership by construction is very dangerous. And this is very important for the things that we're going to see later in the masterclass, that leading and doing policy reform is very dangerous for a very practical thing. Leading for policy reform will lead you to trouble. And I'm starting with that from the very beginning. I don't want to romanticize policy reform in government, because the first thing that policy reform is going to do to you is leading you into trouble. And why? It's very explicit. Leading, if you see the first column, involves three things: mobilizing people, going through challenges, and thrive. And in the columns, I included if that activity is a loss or is a gain, and then the following column is if that activity or that experience is visible for us, our feelings, or is not. Well, we'll see. Mobilizing people is a loss or is a gain for the people who are involved in change? Well, it's a loss, because people don't want to work collectively. They don't want to do that. So it's a loss, and it's very explicit. And it's visible? Yes, it's very visible, because I need to experience right now. If I need to change, I need to work with others. And I don't like to do that. People don't like to do that. Let's see challenges. Challenges is a loss or is a gain? It's a loss, because I need to confront problems. I need to confront situations if I would like change. And that challenge is visible? Yes, it's very visible for the followers and for the people involved in the change that you want to make. And finally, thriving, succeeding, is a loss or is a gain? It's a gain. Great. But is visible or not? It's not visible. Because when you are leading policy reform, you are promising people, you are making people imagine the future. If we do this, if we work together, if we confront challenges, we are going to get there. It's a promise. So it's very difficult because it's a gain, but people cannot see that. So the process of leading policy reform by construction is very dangerous. And it's going to be very dangerous to you, because you have the scenario that from the very beginning is against you. And how is going to leading you to trouble? Anyways, first, you are going to be marginalized. And as I said, this is part of the theory of definitions that we need to deal, because it's really, really important to understand fully what I'm going to say later. You're going to be marginalized, because when you start doing policy reform, the first thing, remember what I'm saying to you. Please remember. When you're trying to make change within the government, the first thing that you're going to hear is who this guy is, who she believes she is, with what authority she's doing this. People are going to try to marginalize you, try to make jokes about you, to ridiculize you, because she has this crazy idea who she is, who he is, in order to do that. And that hurts. It's not easy to deal with that. Also, you're going to be attacked. After they try to make jokes about you and you still are there, they're going to start attacking you, because people are not going to be happy with the changes that you are proposing for many reasons. And corruption is not the only one. It's only one. People are going to attack you not only because they're going to lose their businesses in government, but also they're going to attack you because they don't want to change their way of working. They don't want to change the methodologies of working. They don't want to change the procedures. They don't want to change the way they behave with other authorities. They don't want to do that. So they're going to start attacking you. And they're not going to start attacking you on your idea. They're going to start attacking you on your personal character. Then they're going to seduce you. If they attack you and you are still there, they're going to start to seduce you. And seduce you is, for instance, distracting you from your goal, offering you things, telling you, you know what, Julio, your idea is great, okay? But, you know, I want you to help me in this other ambitious project that I have, and I would like to put you as a boss. They're going to try to offer you things to change your mind and to change your distracting you. One of the ways that they do that, for instance, is when you want to make policy reform in government that is really important and going to change a lot of things, don't be surprised if another authority in government tells you, you know what, Julio, I would like to offer you to be ambassador of the country in this other country because I think it's important for you. What they want to do, they want to take you out from the government because they know that you want to make that change. So it's much better to have you in another place. So it's a seduction, offering you a title that for many people could be nice or could be cool. And you need to be aware of that. And finally, you're going to be alone. And this is this is not too straightforward to understand because you say, how am I going to be alone? If I'm going to work with a team, I'm going to have people around me all the time. How am I going to be alone? Loneliness is not a matter of physical, it's not a physical dimension, what I'm talking about. It's a mental and psychological dimension. You're going to be surrounded by people all the time, but you always will feel alone. And why? Because nobody will understand you. And one of the reasons that nobody will understand you is that you have all the information. Only you have complete information to make decisions. And if people don't have complete information, it's very difficult for them to understand your decisions. That's the problem. So when you're making decisions, most of the times people will not understand your decisions because they don't have complete information. And that feeling of not being understood make you feel lonely all the time. So at the last chapter, How to Survive, we're going to talk about strategies of how to survive feeling alone and at the same time try to fill that emptiness that you have through the process. And one of the things which is really important is that leadership in general, but mostly in government, is not particularly about inspiration. And that's another thing that when I was young, I was wrong, in the sense that I believe that being a leader is to inspire people, is to, mobilizing people with charisma and ideas and words. That's a very tiny part of leading policy reform. Indeed, most of making policy reform happen is not through inspiration, but is through perspiration. It's work really hard and work with the people and show the people how to do it, starting you by doing it. So there are several types of leadership in general. We could say that one type of leadership is the transformational, which is a global, it's a structure, it's the mass study case, and one of the personalities that would say that is Gandhi, for instance, is the time of transformational leadership that is very popular and very well studied. The other one is inspirational, which is more regional, is more cultural, is very studied, not as the transformational, but it's also very well known. We have here not only Robert Kennedy and Steve Jobs, but also we have Messi. Messi is a leader, absolutely, absolutely. Messi has been able to make progress, to confront challenges, and to work collectively to achieve something. And he transformed. He made change in society now. But on the other hand, we have on the left Saladin. Saladin was a Muslim general and king who revolutionized the way in which the Islam world was organized. He was able to unite the Islam world in order to achieve their purposes, something that nobody could believe at that time that someone could be able to do that. Saladin, with all his power and all the figure that he was, he died with not a penny in his pocket. He was one of the most honest people on earth, on human history. So those are examples of inspirational, but are more related with regional, cultural kind of leadership. And finally, the non-traditional leadership, which is much more local. It's the most in need, what we need to change our world indeed, and is the less study. And there the examples are examples that we experience in our life, in our daily life. This kind of leadership that is needed the most is the mom who wants to teach their son to follow his dreams. That's a leadership because he's trying to make progress for his son. He's trying to change, yes, he's trying to change the behavior of his son. And collectively, yes, because his son is not alone. You are going to do it with me. And what is the dangers? What is the risk that the mom, why is dangerous for the mom to be involved? It's dangerous because if the son gets against her, maybe that could break the relationship. And the mom still risk that relationship in order for his son to be better. So of course, this is a great example of leadership. The other one is the neighbor who organized the community to fight against crime, to do something else and to try to convince and to get challenges and to do it collectively and to have the courage to do that. And another example is the teacher who inspires the students to fight status quo. How dangerous this is for a teacher. It's very dangerous. I am a professor, and it's very dangerous for me to tell my students all the time to question the status quo. Why? Because maybe some of them could tell me, why are you teaching us? Maybe they will talk to their parents and tell us, why are you teaching this thing to my kids, to rebel to society? So of course, we face these dangers, but still that means leadership. So why I'm sharing with you all these things? Why? Because once we understand how generally speaking, leadership is, the big question in terms of policy reform is, okay, Julio, this is great, but what about social justice? What about our business in this masterclass? What? Okay, but I would like to make social justice the real one. The transformational is nice, just guide us, give us lessons, values, principles, inspirational too. The non-traditional is very important, but they are at the personal family level or of community level. But social justice is different, because in order for us to have social justice and to fight for social justice, there are three things that we need to achieve. First, that the change that we are looking for is legitimate. If not, it's not going to work, which means we need to make a change that all society agrees, at least even the ones that don't like that, but it says, okay, let's do that. That the change is legitimate, that society embrace that change. If not, it's not going to be social justice. The second characteristic is that it's sustainable. Social justice is not to make social justice now and tomorrow things are going to change, or next month, or a couple of years. Now it needs to be sustainable over time. And finally, it should be institutional, which means that we need institutions to get involved to achieve some things of some conditions that are required to achieve social justice. And I'm going to be more precise here. In order to achieve these things, we need these kinds of changes. To make policy reform, education, health, infrastructure, trade policy, macroeconomic policy, social safety nets, human rights, everything, you name it, you need the things that are on the left of this screen. You need to adapt institutions. You need to create programs that don't exist. You need to assign budgets, the money that are going to fund this. You need to ensure accountability. And finally, you need to address the stakeholders. In order for a policy reform to achieve social justice, you need to do these things. And unfortunately, you cannot achieve those things outside the government. Sorry, you cannot do that. You can exercise leadership in other spheres, of course. You can exercise leadership in your family, yes. In your community, yes. School, yes. But social change, can you do that? No, because you need these characteristics. And the only way to do that is through government, to make that happen, to be lasting, to be sustainable. So policy, so to make these changes and to achieve social justice, you need reform. That's what reform means. And now I hope that we have clarity of what reform in government is. But reform for social justice requires reform, as I said. It's an intrinsic characteristic of reform. And reform, in turn, requires public leadership. And this is one thing that I would like to stress here. And maybe this is going to be controversial for some of you, but it's the thing that I really believe, that public leadership doesn't exist without policy reform, and policy reform is impossible without public leadership. Again, public leadership is meaningless without policy reform, and policy reform is impossible without public leadership. So I would like to stop here a little bit to receive comments and questions, because what we're going to do from now is to start talking about reform and what it means. What is the relationship between public leadership and what is reform? What is policy reform? Those are the concepts that is important to discuss in order to start discussing policy implementation from a practical viewpoint. So Tracy, I think that this is a good time to receive questions and comments for a few minutes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julio. I first just want to acknowledge folks who submitted questions before the session. Thank you so much for sending your questions. Most of them will relate to some of the future sessions that Julio has planned, so he'll definitely select some of those for responding to. Today, I think we have a couple of questions in the chat already in the Q&A box. So I want to give Mabato a chance, Mabato Okre, to ask a question. Mabato, if you'd like to come off mute or be on camera to ask your question, maybe raise your hand in the chat and we can bring you on. I'll wait a few seconds. Okay, I don't see.
I hope I'm audible.
Oh, there we go. Welcome. Yes, please go in. Would you like to be on camera as well?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, perfect. So this will just take a couple of seconds. Natita will make you a panelist so that we can see you.
If it would take time, just to save time, I'm happy just to quickly ask.
Okay, go ahead.
Question.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Mabata. Go ahead.
So thank you, Professor Julio, for sharing such a compelling and pretty realistic presentation around policy reform. My question was about institutional transformation through reform. I work in advocacy and knowledge production, and I historically, through my work in advocacy, I realized that sometimes we can work towards reforming policies, but implementing the reform tends to be a challenge institutionally with technocrats. So my question then is, what is the difference between the reform in itself and how does it contribute to institutional transformation? And if there are any challenges within institutional transformation, how are you able to accomplish that? Thank you.
Of course, Mavato, thank you for the question. We're gonna discuss this also in other sessions, but I'm gonna give you an answer here. And in order to make policy reform through institutional change, the first restriction of challenge that you're gonna have is the technocrats. It's technocracy. People are accustomed to work in one way and they don't want to change for many reasons, as I already said. So one of the things that is important for all of us to understand is that change, not only on the personal level, but also on the institutional level, must be progressive, must be slow. For what? For technocrats to be able to absorb that change. One of the problems that when we're young and we get into government and we want to make those changes, is that we want to make it really quickly and we want to make it overnight. We want to make laws and programs and everything that change completely the way that the government has been working. At the very end, we could be right in the sense that, yeah, the government needs to change and need to change a lot in order to provide that. But at the same time, we need to be realistic, is that people can only change in a pace that they can absorb. So what is my recommendation? That you will always have in your mind the plan, the idea of the whole change that you want to make. But institutionally speaking, try to develop that plan in the ways that the change comes progressively, just little by little, to start people to get accustomed to the change. That's one idea. And the second one that comes to my mind are incentives. As I said, policy reform is less about technical knowledge and is more about understanding human beings. And one of the things that humans react very quickly is through incentives. Give them, Mavato, a reason for them to change. Not only the reason that we need to make that change because people are going to receive better public services. Unfortunately, sorry, this is real, what I've seen. Not enough. Technocrats who are supposed to protect society's well-being, they don't behave that way. They want to have incentives at the personal level to make those changes. One of the things or incentives that that sometimes work out is to try to give them opportunities to be in other positions in which they could take charge of different things, to have responsibilities that don't make more work, but will give them more exposure to other authorities, to have more protagonism. That is one of them. But indeed, to understand the incentives of technocrats, you need to know who they are. And that takes time. And there's another thing that I understood, is that I wanted change very quickly, but I didn't know that this is a process and takes time. And if I really believe on this, if I am really believing in this change because it's my purpose, I will find the patience to try to do this in a way that could be done progressively and people could accept, because you are dealing with institutions that are working the same way for decades. Thank you for your question.
Thank you so much, sir. That was really insightful. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thanks so much. So we have another question from Stephanie Phillip. Stephanie, if you'd like to go off mute and ask your question to Julio. Stephanie's still here?
Hello?
Oh,
Hello.
hi, welcome, Stephanie. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to ask my question. I work with the EFCC Nigeria, which is the leading anti-corruption agency. And over the years, I've seen how reforms usually do not deliver the expected outcome. And that has even made some scholars to say that West Africa seems to be, or Sub-Saharan Africa seems to be one area that has registered a lot of reform somersaults, or so to say, registered a lot of reform failure. And I would like to ask the speaker or the presenter today, what do you think might be the reason for this repeated record of reform failure, so to say, and what can be done to improve the states within Nigeria or the Sub-Sahara or the West African region at large? Thank you.
Of course, Stephanie, I don't know much about Sub-Saharan Africa and Africa in general, but I could tell you my experience in Peru and why many of policy reforms don't work. Because when you were telling me, when you are commenting this is exactly what happened in Peru. And this is exactly what happened in Latin America in general, that not all, but most policy reforms fail and they don't work. There are structural reasons and there are specific reasons that I believe. The structural reasons, I'm going to be very briefly, is about institutional quality in general. The rule of law in our countries don't work. Laws do not work. So it's very difficult for programs and to initiatives to go running free of corruption, free of inefficiencies, because having institutions is not only having a good judiciary. Having institutions is having also a very good civil service system, right? So technocrats that have a career, that they have trained, and we don't have that. So part of the reason, the structural reason why reform fails is because in the developing world, we don't have civil service system, which is a very important institution, aside from the rule of law that I comment. The specific ones, the more specific ones that I found in achieving policy reform is continuity. Policy reform requires a very continuous effort, to build, to go progressively. And continuity is very difficult in our countries because of the rotation of technocrats in our governments. In Peru, for instance, we have 500,000 people working in the government, and the average rotation, it means the average time that they spend in one position, in one job in the government, it's 8 months. 8 months. And in Latin America, the average is 6 months, which means that if you are working with a team doing policy reform, it's very likely that your team only will be with you 6 months or 8 months, without talking about you, without talking about yourself, even in that case. It's incredible, but at any level, not only at the middle level of bureaucracy, but also at the level of vice ministers, of ministers, the ministers are only for a few months. So how in this world, a minister that gets into the government with a great idea could do a policy reform that could take 2 years? That's not enough. Policy reform takes different amounts of time, but I would say 2 years for a regular policy reform. How he's or she's going to do that if she's going to stay there for 6 months? So that's another big problem of the restrictions that I saw. Thank you for your question, Stephanie.
Thanks so much, Stephanie and Julio. Julio, I'm going to pose one more question from the Q&A.
And then we will continue, yes.
Okay, great. So this is from Sabina. She's actually asked that I read the question on her behalf. It's also in the Q&A box. So she says, thank you for sharing your experience and for your thoughtful reflections. Humility and human-centered approach seems to be very rare. Initially, I was planning to ask how to break through the ceiling and effectively challenge the status quo, as I share many of the observations you presented. However, after listening to your session, I find myself even more curious about how you maintain such resilience and energy to keep pushing. I often experience feelings of helplessness and overwhelm, especially when support is lacking. Even when forming a pressure group and backing it with research and well-founded recommendations, it can be discouraging to face dismissal. Thanks again. That's from Sabina Novak, who I believe is from Poland.
Thank you for the question. It's very thoughtful. And thank you for your kind words. Well, I know what you mean because I've been in the same position. One of the things that I used to say when I am questioned about these things is that through my life, I've been doing exactly the contrary what most people told me. And that's why I achieve some of the things that I really wanted and follow my dreams. Following your dreams means that most of the time you are gonna be doing things that most people are advising not to do. and don't be worried about that. And why not don't be worried about that is because in contrary to what popular knowledge told us every day in the media, most human beings, they don't make any effort to be better. This idea that human beings were entrepreneurship, that we work hard because we want to achieve everything else more, that we are driven, is just a political discourse. That's not true. Most people in the world, across cultures, they don't want to change. They want to make the minimal effort to survive. In my opinion, where is the time in which humans, we do our best and we make things incredible as a community when our survival is under threat? When our survival is under threat, you see human beings doing exceptional things. But when that doesn't happen, no. Most of us are pretty mediocre species. And people don't want to risk. People don't want to get out of their comfort zone. People don't want to try new things. And why? There is an explanation. The explanation is that people don't want to fail because failure is painful. When you fail, it's very painful. It hurts your self-esteem. And the thing that people protect is our self-esteem. So we don't want to be hurt. Every time we go to a place that we don't know, we feel uncomfortable. Every time we go to a job that we don't know, we feel uncomfortable. Every time we try to meet someone that is not of our culture, we need some uncomfortable. So getting out of your comfort zone is not easy. That's why people don't do it. So when you try to do that, and when you try to risk and do crazy things, most people at your side, your family, your friends, why are you going to do that? Are you crazy? So don't follow those advices. Just do what you really think it's meaningful for you. And how did I do that? Because I have purpose. And I'm going to be extremely honest with you. It's just my personal experience that I had purpose since I was a kid because of my dad. Everyone has a source of purpose. And that source of purpose could be different things. Could be your parents, could be your family, could be an experience that you had through your life, a trauma, many things. But in my case, the source of my purpose was my dad. And that was the fire that I had through my life. So that gave me the energy to support, to confront the opinions of my circle. They didn't tell me, why are you going to do that? What? You know, Julio, you are doing crazy things. Running for president, you're crazy. Going to government, they don't pay well. You are in an international organization. Why are you going to study PhD? It doesn't give you any more money. Why are you going to study abroad? You're going to get far from your family. You know, so many things that I heard through my life, and that were not true. The second part of your question was, this is very dissatisfying when you're trying to convince someone with data, with research, with ideas of how things should be done, and we feel that we fail because they don't do the things that we are trying for them to do. And I did that, and it was one of the mistakes that I made when I was young, and I was in the Inter-American Development Bank, because I was not only confused, but I was arrogant. And I was confused because I didn't understand how human beings make decisions. And I was arrogant because I thought that having knowledge is the way to make change. And that's not true. I'm going to explain myself. People make decisions not because of not rationally. People make decisions by emotions. Every time you believe that you are making a decision because you have data, you are lying to yourself. It's a defense mechanism, because at the very end you're making a decision because it's emotional. And that's how we are. We make decisions based on emotions. So if you want to convince someone, and I tell my daughter this all the time, if you have a great idea, which is a rational idea, the first thing that you need to do to introduce that idea into someone is to open his heart, of her heart. And when you open her heart, you got your idea, and you introduce your idea to them. Why you need to open her heart first? Because there is an invisible shield, an emotional shield, when you are giving them an argument of an idea. And the first thing is to reduce those defenses, open their heart emotionally, and then introduce. What is the meaning of open heart? What in reality? In reality is to connect. Is to connect with that person. Is to connect emotionally with them. Is to create trust that you don't have an agenda. That you don't have an agenda. That you only care because of the change. That you really want to share. That you're not arrogant, that you're not telling them, and you're not, and that person is not perceiving that, you know what, I know, and you don't, so I'm gonna educate you. No, you have an horizontal kind of relationship. When you create those conditions, it's much easier to tell story and to convince people when you get that emotional connection. And finally, the storytelling that we're gonna talk in the third session. It's impossible. I'm telling you, it's impossible to convince someone through technical explanations. So they said, oh, you know what? This policy design is great because I have the data, I have the information. No, you need to create story like Cinderella or Snow White, and we're going to talk precisely about that. How to create a story in which you could emotions could emerge when people listen to you and say, oh, that makes sense. And maybe they didn't fully understand what you want to say, but it's very helpful. So the emotional side is the key to get there. It took me years to understand that. Thank you for the question.
Thanks so much, Julio and Sabina, for the question. So Julio, we have 2 minutes left in the time that we set aside for the masterclass. And do you think you need another few minutes to wrap up and maybe give folks a bit of a taste of what to expect in the next session?
Yes, I think we should keep going. because I have the last part of the masterclass, and maybe we can, if we have extra minutes at the end, we can spend time with more questions. Is that all right?
Okay. Well, I just want to thank folks who have joined us
Okay.
this morning. I imagine some folks might have to leave. Thank you for staying on. And we will already send communication about the second session next week. And please send us more questions. So if you're able to stay on, you are more than welcome to. Julio's got a few more slides. And yeah, just to thank everyone. And we look forward to seeing you next week if you have to hop off now. Thanks, Julio. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start discussing what reform is, what policy reform is. We already did that with public leadership, but reform. And before doing that, we're going to discuss this problem, which is the principal agent problem. And I'm sure that is going to help you to resolve questions that maybe you had in the past in relationship to how is to lead in the public sector. The principal agent problem has to do with the comparison between how to do change in the public sector in comparison to the private sector. And I receive this all the time. The government should have leaders like we have in the private sector. It would be great if governments are run as companies, are corporate, because the private sector is efficient, is productive, it's and so we need to do that. We need to take people from the private sector to go to the public sector to make things better. Many people think that way. Well, I believe that they are completely wrong, and I'm going to try to explain. This is the principal agent problem. So we have leadership in the private sector is a line, it's a vertical line, and leadership in the public sector is a circle, and they behave very differently. So in the private sector, it's a line because this is the structure of the public sector. You have workers that listen to the managers who listen to the CEO who needs to obey the board of directors, and the board of directors that need to follow the priorities of the shareholders. So in the private sector, everyone is aligned. Aside from the very specific interest that each group has, the most important goal, the strategic goal, is the same. Everyone wants the same. If the workers do a good job, then the managers are going to be happy and have a good salaries. The CEO will be happy, the board of directors too, and the shareholders too. So doing leadership is a vertical line. Everyone is aligned. So the challenges exist, but are pretty different. Let's take a look at the public sector. At the public sector, it's a circle. It's a little bit more chaotic. If you are a policymaker, then you have to deal, when you are in the government and you want to make policy reform, you have to deal with different fronts at the same time. You need to deal with the bureaucracy, your colleagues at different levels, in different programs, in different agencies, one front. The other front is Congress. How many times I've been called to Congress to explain the reforms that I had in my mind? How many times to Congress? But at the same time, you have the control organism, the organisms that are following how the budget is spent. If you are following the rules in managing the budget, but at the same time, you have the judiciary that is looking at you all the time as policymaker in the government. If you are making a mistake, if you are breaking a civil law, that happens all the time. Ask bureaucrats who are in the government. And finally, you have the executive, which is who is your boss in government. That could be a vice minister, could be a minister, or could be the president. It depends on the position that you are. And finally, the people who wants change. So my question here in this different organization is, do you really believe that every one of these groups are aligned to the same objective? That every one of these groups, the objective is to benefit the people? And that's not true. What's what people say. When you go to the judiciary, they're going to tell you that they protect the people, and the legislative the same thing. But that's not true. Every single group here has different incentives, and they have different priorities. So the problem or the challenge to be a public leader trying to do policy reform is that you need to deal with different fronts at the same time that have different interests and different perspectives. It's much more complex. That's why businessmen who are successful in the private sector and then get into government, they are a disaster, and they make so many mistakes that start from breaking the law. Why? Because they don't have patience. If they are in a world in which everything is aligned and is vertical, and when they say something, everybody does that, they go to the government and say, let's do that. Many people say, no, we can't, because that law is preventing to do that. The Congress doesn't want to do that. The technocracy is opposing. So businessmen who get into the government start losing their patience. And because they lose their patience, they start breaking the law. They're starting also getting into corrupt activities, but not because they are naturally corrupt. No, it's just because the practices and the culture in the private sector, some of them are considered corrupt activities in the government. For instance, hiring my family. If you are in the private sector, you can hire your family as the CEO, the CFO, whatever. If you are in the government and you hire your own family, that's breaking the law, and that's considered corruption. And we have seen that many, many times. So this is very important to understand. For me, in my opinion, humble opinion, public leadership in the government is much more complex. It requires many, many skills that are not required in the private sector, and is misunderstood. So don't think that the knowledge in the private sector is even better or is enough to try to deal with the complexity of the public sector. This is the one thing. There's a second thing, and it's reform. What reform is. And reform, the thing that we're going to analyze, is a structural change. We need a structural change. As Stephanie mentioned, reform is planned. We need to plan for the reform. It's gradual. It's partial, because we want policy reform is in an area, not in many, not the whole system, not whole society. Is very specific. It's institutional. It goes through changes in institutions. It's peaceful, because you are not killing anyone. And it means to adjust the system. That's a reform. That's what we're going to talk about the whole master class. This is reform. Okay, let's compare it with revolution. What is the difference between reform and revolution? Well, revolution is a structural change. It is, it's planned. No, it's not planned. It's very chaotic. Revolution is gradual. No, it's radical and it's sudden. It's partial. No, it's comprehensive. Revolution is outside institutions. It's not inside institutions. Revolutions are very violent, are confrontational, and it doesn't mean to adjust the system. It means to replace this system. This distinction is extremely important. The big difference between reform and revolution, and why I believe in reform and I don't believe in revolution. In my opinion, revolution rarely works and rarely achieve the intended outcomes. And I'm going to try to show you some examples why I don't believe in revolution. Mainly because revolution goes against human behavior. Human behavior, it's slow. Human behavior requires progressively changes in attitudes and customs. Changes overnight in human behaviors are against human nature. That's why revolution doesn't work. Let's take a look. The French Revolution offered an equal society, right? An equal society, equality, fraternity, And what happened? Happened all of this. The storming of the Bastille, the Reign of Terror, Napoleon Bonaparte, that was the consequence of the French Revolution, the Restoration, Napoleon III, and finally the Third Republic in 1870. That was the first manifestation of a republic as a society of equal citizens. It took 82 years. It took 82 years for the French Revolution to deliver. That's what history tells us, right? Let's talk about the Soviet Revolution. The Soviet Revolution, what it promised? It promised a system completely different than the SARS, than the imperial SARS. Not hierarchical, not vertical, but a society of the proletariat, of the workers, socialism, right? In which everyone has the same rights, everyone has the same voice and everything. Was that true? No, indeed. It took a lot of time, 69 years, until now what is Russia. Of course, it has their challenges with dealing with democracy and everything, but that some kind of liberties and freedoms and opportunities people could have. It took a lot of time. Another example, the Chinese Revolution with Mao. What he promised? Well, pretty similar, exactly the contrary to the empire system, right? The tyrannic, abusive, privileged kind of system. And in the case of China, it took 52 years in order to achieve some kind of progress for their people. So revolutions do not deliver. They take rarely deliver outcomes, and it takes a lot of time, and they are violent. And if we talk about the United States, it's almost the same thing. I mean, people who really believe that the independence of the United States was a complete change, okay, I respect that opinion. In my opinion, don't. When the United States get independent, they had a democracy for a very small portion of the population. It was white, male. That's it. I'm sorry. White, male, and landowners. You need to fulfill the three conditions in order to be a citizen of a supposed to be a new free state. So it took the United States decades, and until the 60s, to start having, human rights for almost everybody, and still is struggling with that. So in that case, it's not true. And if we talk about Latin America and Simón Bolívar and San Martín, well, it's worse. The independence around those years also more than 200 years, and our societies are pretty similar, pretty unequal, pretty discriminatory, no rights for everyone. Indeed, it has not achieved the promises that they deliver. That's why I believe that reform is a much higher proposition. And if we talk about the Arab Spring, it's a very recent phenomenon that tells us exactly the same story. Countries that rebel against the system that they wanted to impose democracy, society that mobilizes, and at the end, what happened? They return almost to the same thing. So reform is for me a much higher way. And this is interesting. I've been thinking about that for years. Why radical messiahs that used to lead revolutions appear almost all the time, not all the time, but almost all the time appear on the left? How you notice that? That the people who sell themselves as messiahs to make the change, they appear mostly on the left, on the ideological left. And one of the reasons that is true is because the left is associated with this ideology of make big changes, structural changes. And in order to do that, you need a different mind that could do that. And the right, on the other hand, instead of making change, the right is more prone to protect the status quo. So that's one of the reasons why most, not all of them, but most messiahs come from the left. And after doing this comparison, also, we need to make a comparison not only between reform and revolution, but also reform and modernization. When you get into the government, you're going to hear this word. Believe me, you're going to hear this word. We need to modernize. We need to modernize. And people get confused and they believe that modernization of the state is the same of reform, of policy reform. And they're very different things. And we're going to compare here. Modernization is not a structural change. It's a continuous change. It's like upgrading. It's like when you have a software, I would say like Excel, Microsoft Excel, and every time you need to update, right? You're updating almost the same thing with different characteristics. It's an upgrading, as I said, it's gradual, of course. It's total because you are upgrading, you are modernizing the state in general, but you are doing mostly through technology. So the difference between modernization and reform is that reform is a structural change of doing things, of approaching, of perspective, of new ways of interpreting life. Reform is about the manifestation of your values and principles and how you believe life should be run, of how government should approach citizenship. Modernization is not. It's just to be sure that all the technological advances that we have are applying the government to deliver exactly the same services. To modernize the way, to make more efficient the way we deliver the same services. Reform is about delivering new services because behind that is a principle, is a value. And it's also peaceful, and as I said, means upgrading the system. So this is really important to understand. Reform, revolution, and modernization. And the last thing, and we're pretty good with the time, it's we're going to talk about the types of reform. We have different types of reform, and we need to have clarity about that. Here, the first column is the kind of reform. The second is the focus, what is their priority. Third, and the third, the four, and the five columns are the types of reforms. We have laws, we have programs, and we have institutions. There are generally the three types of reforms. So the first one is the first generation kind of reforms. The first generation reforms, their goal is to create stability in a country, only stability. And we have three examples. In terms of laws, for instance, is price stabilization or interest rates. Is to say through a law that from now, the government is not going to control prices. Prices is going to be defined by markets. I don't need a program. I don't need the bureaucracy. I just need a paper and a pen and say that, and that's it. So that's one example. In terms of programs, is the gas stabilization fund, for instance. It's a very interesting program in developing countries that they don't produce oil. They don't produce gas, so they need to import that. So they're very vulnerable because prices in gas are changing all the time. They're affecting the poor. So what they do, really smart. They create a fund, and when the prices of oil goes down, right, they take the money from there to feed the fund, and when the prices of gas and oil gets up, they subsidize that price with the fund. At the very end, the price always is almost the same because of that. So it's really pretty smart. And this stabilization is a first generation reform. And institutions is the third case in which in the first generation we have the creation of the Federal Reserve, a banking regulator. Is a very important reform. It's in the first generation. We have the second generation reforms, and the focus is not stability now. The focus is governance, institutions, and dealing with the specific sectors. An example of laws is anti-corruption laws. You are dealing with governance and laws in anti-corruption. Not all, but a big part of anti-corruption policy is to change the laws. It's only a part, of course. Another example of second generation in programs is the civil service, the creation of civil service, that you have a career, that you have certainty if you spend a number of times where you're going to be. So that's a very important reform that belongs to the second generation reform, and it's a program. And finally, an institution, as example of second generation, is the economic development agencies. These agencies that help businesses, farmers, for instance, to try to be more productive, to produce more, to export, to improve the quality of their products, those kinds of things. This is not a program. This is not a law. This is an institution because you are creating a whole agency with technocrats and everything. And finally, the third generation reforms, which has not to do with stability, not to institutions and governments, but with sustainable development. And that the third generation reforms in terms of laws, for instance, one example is regulation for extractive industries. Mining, fishing, all these extractive industries that they operate in many countries in the world, particularly the developing world, they need to have regulations to protect the environment, but also to protect the interests of the local communities, right? So law that is directed to that is one good example. In terms of programs, we have the social safety net programs that are funds, that are programs that the government puts money there, and they start delivering services for the poor, like cash transfers of health services, very targeted to them. This is a program. And the third generation reform, as example of an institution, is the Environmental Protection Agency. It's an agency, it's an institution, but it belongs to the third generation. So countries are located, each countries are located in different stages, but it's important for me to show you the universe of type of reforms that we have in policy reform before addressing how to implement reform. This discussion is also important because it approaches us to the political side of policy reform, which if you go to every specific cell, there are 9 cells, right, from examples. And if you go to every one of them, each of them require different political capital. Yes, different political capital. They follow different, they involve different stakeholders, and they have different goals, strategic goals. So it's very important for you when you decide what is the policy that you want to implement in the government when you are there, if you are already there, is that you need to understand this. What is the complexity of the changes that you want to make? Who are the people involved, and what is the political capital that you need to do that? And of course, we're going to discuss that in the rules of the game and also in the stakeholders session. So that is mostly the first session, the discussion about what public leadership is and what reform is, because if we don't discuss these things, the other sessions are going to be much more difficult to understand and will give you into confusion, and I don't want to do that. But my final thought, it's something that I thought about. Doing social justice and getting into public leadership is very hard and it's very painful. It hurts, and it's going to change your life at the personal level, at the family level. It's satisfying, but at the same time traumatic. It's very dangerous. So the question is, where we find the strength to do all of this? Where is the source in which you are going to find the strength to deal with all of this? And I really believe this is not a romantic thing. This is not a discourse, because I told you, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not going to lie to you. And I really believe that the strength, at least, that I found was love. And I'm going to explain that. I'm going to explain that because it's very realistic. When you have a doctor that is operating your body, that doctor has received a long time training. He was in medical school, he was practitioner, he was many years. He was trained, he was taught, he learned to try to make surgeries and to try to help you in your health, all right? So he can do that. But to be a father or to be a mother, there is no university to know that, to understand that. Engineers go to schools of engineering. Doctors, as I said, the same thing. Many professions, they have schools and colleges to learn that and to do it well. But to be a parent, there is no way. There is no university, there is no program to be enrolled to be a good parent. You learn to be a good parent. And for some of you that maybe you already have children, you know that it's extremely hard and it's very complex. It's much more complex than many professions to be a father. And you do it well. Why you do it well? Why? Why is the reason why you have not been trained to be father, but you do it well at the end? Why? Because of love. Because you have a purpose. And when you have a mission and you have a purpose, you learn and you fight and you get involved. And you said, what? When I was single, I was such an indisciplined, disorganized, confused guy. And now that I have my baby, oh, I transform myself. I'm very organized. I do everything. I took care of my baby. I change. Why I change if I am, in essence, the same person? Because of love. Because my baby give me purpose. And purpose make me change. So what I'm telling you is that is going to happen to you. If you have purpose, if you really have purpose, and I know that you are here because you have purpose. If you are participating in this masterclass, taking 2 hours from your life, it's because you have purpose. It's because you are interested. It's because you care. Because now you will be listening to the music or with your friends. So I know that I am talking to you. If you have purpose and you really believe in social justice and you really believe in your idea, in your policy design that will make people's life change, that creates purpose, that creates love, and the purpose will give you the strength to learn. Why? Because nobody is trained to be in government and to conduct policy reform. That's not true. I am a professor of a school of public policy, and schools of public policy don't teach that. And why don't teach that? Because policy reform is the real world. It's not about theory. Nobody, there is no institution that will teach you how to do policy reform in government, because it's a real life thing. It's dealing with human beings, has nothing to do with nothing to do, but little to do with technicalities and knowledge. It's much more to understand how people are and human beings are. So if you really believe on your idea and social justice, you will find the strength. And it happened to me, when I was in government, I did a couple of things. I thought, oh my God, I was able to do this. And that, how? If a few years ago, I thought that it was impossible for me to do these things. Why? Because of purpose. Purpose makes you change. And that is going to happen to you. So don't be afraid, because afraid is a natural response of humans, but don't allow your nervousness or your fear to suppress your willingness for purpose, because the purpose is going to give you the tools that you need to learn, to understand, and to navigate, and to do policy reform eventually. So that's the first session, and I would like to spend a few minutes if you have a couple of questions about that. And see you the next session, in which the next session we're going to start talking about how to make your idea a policy, really design the policy before getting into the stakeholders, how to do that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julio. And thanks everyone for the engagement so far. We've had a couple of questions in the chats today, but also before this. We won't get to all the questions today, but we are keeping track of them, and Julio will have those questions and hopefully find opportunities to get to most of them. So as Julio said, the next session is next week, same time, 8 a.m. Eastern time. The focus of next week's session will build on today's session. It will focus on policy first, policy second. looking at what is a public problem, identifying solutions, and then balancing a strategic approach with some quick wins. We have about 2 minutes before we're at the top of the hour, and I want to just once again appreciate all of you. The full recording will be on our website. You'll get an email reminder about next week's session. And I just want to hand over to Mario Becon to do a closing. Yeah, once again, much appreciation, Julio. It was super insightful session.
Yeah, welcome.
So, Mario?
Just as a close, first of all, thank you so much, Julio. This was amazing. I mean, like this has had the effect of maybe 2 or 3 coffees on me. I'm ready for taking on the world, and I really hope that that energy is like something similar to what others have felt throughout the seminar. Very much looking forward to the second session. Quick announcements, right? Like the questions that we were not able to answer, to respond to, we will definitely pass them to Julio, and we will find ways to actually talk about those issues. We want to acknowledge all those questions, and we want to be able to respond to them as it makes sense throughout the seminar, and particularly at the beginning of the next session, because these are very important things. Like there are tons of things that could be discussed. Issues related to how complicated this is, and how issues related, for example, to trust in institutions, trust in government, trust to the possibility of change affect this possibility, these windows of opportunity or the lack of them for reform to actually happen. The sense of community and how community among the people that are interested in becoming public leaders over time, or that have that role over time, can also help in try to support each other. This doesn't have to be a completely lonely affair, right? And this discussion on how to move from idea to policy that you're going to be taking over next week. Much more to discuss during the next few weeks. Thank you so much for joining us. There was like, even past the mark of 90 minutes, we had almost 70% of people that stayed there beyond the allocated time, and I thank you very much for that. If you know other people that were not able to join us, we will have all the material on the website, and we will announce it also through and discuss it through social media and email. Thank you so much for staying with us. Thank you, Julio, for this. Thank you, Tracy, Natida, Alessandra, for being there. Much appreciated, and see you in a week.